He never expected a normal morning to change the direction of his whole year. The day started quietly, like most days for him. He arrived early at the music room, holding his old practice folder, the same one he had carried for years. The hallway was still empty, and the soft echo of his footsteps was the only sound. He liked these early hours. They gave him a bit of peace before the noise of classes, before the pressure of expectations. Before the fear that he wasn't talented enough, he walked to the piano in the corner of the room and lifted the cover. His fingers hovered above the keys, but he didn't play anything yet. Sometimes he did this, just paused to breathe, to think, to remember why he loved music even when it felt hard. He had always been the kind of student who worked quietly, who didn't want attention, who felt more comfortable letting the piano speak for him. When the other students began arriving, he stepped aside like he usually did. They talked loudly, laughed with each other, compared notes, discussed which pieces they were hoping to avoid this semester. He didn't join in. He didn't mind being quiet. It was just the way he was. When the teacher walked in, the room settled. Everyone found their seats. Today was the day each student would be assigned a piece for the big end of term performance. Some students whispered about which songs they wanted, which ones they feared. He sat still, hoping for something manageable, something beautiful but not too complicated. He didn't think of himself as special. He wasn't the fastest learner or the most confident performer. He simply tried his best. One by one, the teacher went down the list, handing out printed sheets. Some students sighed with relief, others groaned, and a few smiled with excitement. Then the teacher stopped in front of him and placed a sheet on his desk. He looked at the title and felt his heart drop. It was a piece he had only heard in rumors, whispers, from older students who spoke about it like it was some sort of legend. The tempo shifts were unpredictable. The left-hand patterns were almost unnatural. And the emotion behind it was famously difficult to express. Many students jokingly called it the unplayable song. People said only a few performers in the school's history had attempted it for a public performance. He didn't know what to say. His breath caught in his throat. He looked up at the teacher, wondering if there had been a mistake. But the teacher simply nodded at him with calm eyes, as if saying, "You can do this." Without using words, around him, a few students exchanged glances. Someone whispered, "Not quietly enough. Why him?" Another muttered, "He's dead." No one gets through that song. Kept his head down, pretending he didn't hear. But the words stuck with him. The rest of the class passed in a blur. Students were practicing small sections of their pieces, chatting about how they would prepare. Meanwhile, he kept staring at the sheet music in front of him. The notes almost felt like they were floating off the page, dancing in ways his fingers didn't understand. He touched the paper with a kind of careful respect, as if the song might fall apart if he wasn't gentle. When class ended, he didn't leave right away. He waited until the room was nearly empty. The teacher approached him quietly. "Do you have any questions?" the teacher asked. He wanted to ask why. Why give him this? Why choose something that had defeated so many before him? But he didn't want to sound like he was complaining. "No," he said softly. "I'll try." The teacher smiled in a warm way. Trying is all that matters at first. Trust the process. Trust yourself. He nodded, but he wasn't sure he believed it. On his way home, he held the sheet music carefully, almost like it was something fragile. The streets were busy with their usual sounds vendors calling out prices, children running around after school, cars honking in the distance. But in his mind, none of it registered clearly. His thoughts kept replaying the moment he saw the title on the page. At home, he went straight to his room. He placed the sheet music on the table, sat down, and just stared at it again. The notes looked even more intimidating under the warm light of his small desk lamp. The bends in the staff lines, the cramped clusters of fast passages. The sudden dynamic jumps, everything about it felt like a mountain. He pressed his fingers against the table, imagining the keys, imagining the movements he would have to learn. A wave of doubt washed over him. What if he failed? What if everyone was right? What if the teacher had made a mistake believing he could do it? He closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. For a long moment, he didn't move. He thought of his past performances, moments when he shook on stage, times when he made mistakes he still remembered years later. He thought of the times he overheard people say he was too quiet, too hesitant, too unsure of himself. But then he also thought of the times the piano made him feel brave, the times he played alone in this same room and felt something inside him lift. He thought of the small moments that reminded him why he started music in the first place, the nights he fell asleep with melodies in his mind, the comfort he found in each chord. He opened his eyes again. The sheet music was still there, waiting. He reached out and picked it up slowly, reading through the first few lines. He didn't understand the full structure yet, but he understood one thing clearly. This song demanded more than skill. It demanded heart. It demanded patience, emotion, and a kind of bravery he wasn't sure he had yet, but maybe he could find it. He placed the sheet on the piano stand and sat down. His fingers hovered above the keys, just like they had earlier that morning. This time, though, he pressed down on the first notes. They came out uneven, a little shaky, but they were real. They were a beginning. He played the first measure again and again, trying to get the feel of it. The next few lines were even more difficult. His fingers stumbled. The rhythm felt strange under his hands. He made mistakes over and over, but he kept going. Hours passed without him noticing. The room grew darker, and the only light was his small lamp reflecting against the piano's polished surface. He kept replaying tiny sections, stopping and starting, correcting little errors. Some moments nearly broke his patience. There were times he wanted to slam the piano lid shut and walk away, but he didn't. He stayed. He practiced until his fingers felt warm and tired. The notes didn't sound like music yet, not even close, but there was a spark. Something small but alive. Something that told him he could try again tomorrow. When he finally stopped, he leaned back and exhaled. He looked at the sheet music again. It still felt impossible, but it didn't feel quite as terrifying as before. Maybe it wasn't a wall. Maybe it was a long, steep path. He turned off the lamp and stood there in the dim room for a moment. The silence felt comforting, like the world was giving him space to think. Just as he was about to leave the room, he glanced back at the piano. It sat quietly, waiting. It had always been there for him, through every fear, every mistake, every tiny victory. Maybe the teacher saw something in him that he couldn't see yet. Maybe this wasn't a punishment. Maybe it was an invitation. He walked out of the room with a quiet sense of determination forming in him. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was slow, steady, and honest. He didn't know what the next days would bring. He didn't know if he would ever master the piece, but he knew one thing with certainty. He would try, and sometimes. Trying was the first step toward becoming someone he never expected to be. He woke up earlier than usual the next morning. The sky outside his window was still a dim gray, the kind of quiet dawn that made everything feel slower, softer, and somehow heavier. He sat up slowly and rubbed his eyes, but even in that half-awake state, his mind immediately went back to the song. The same sheet music that felt impossible the night before now pulled at his thoughts again, waiting for him to return. He moved through his morning routine without much focus. He brushed his teeth, washed his face, changed his clothes, but his mind wasn't with him. It was already at the piano, already wrestling with those difficult notes. He felt a strange mix of excitement and dread, like he was preparing for something big even though he had barely begun. When he reached the school, the sun had risen enough to brighten the hallway. Students were arriving, carrying their bags, chatting with energy he did not feel. He walked through them quietly, the way he always did, but today his silence felt heavier. He wasn't thinking about anything else, no conversations, no assignments, no small worries that usually filled his mind. There was only the music. Before class began, he slipped into the practice room. It was empty, which gave him a small sense of relief. He didn't want anyone to hear him struggle, not yet. He closed the door gently, placed his bag on the floor, and sat down at the piano. He opened the sheet music again and stared at it for a moment. The notes felt like they were staring back at him, challenging him. He took a deep breath, placed his fingers on the keys, and began. The first few lines were as difficult as he remembered. His hands had not memorized anything yet, so he had to look back and forth between the keys and the paper, causing him to lose the rhythm again and again. Every time he made a mistake, it felt like a tiny crack in his confidence. But he kept going. After a while, he forced himself to slow down. He played the same 3 bars repeatedly, then the next 3. Then he tried to combine them. It didn't sound right, but it sounded a little better than yesterday. That tiny improvement gave him just enough hope to keep going. Minutes turned into an hour, and he didn't notice until a knock on the door made him jump. One of the students peeked inside. "Class is starting," they said. He nodded quickly, closed the piano lid, grabbed his things, and rushed out. His heart was still racing, not from the knock, but from how hard he had been concentrating. During class, he tried to pay attention. The teacher was explaining musical phrasing and expression, things that usually interested him. But today, his mind drifted again. Every example the teacher played reminded him of the emotional depth he needed for his own piece, something he hadn't even begun to reach. After classes ended, he returned to the practice room immediately. He practiced until the school began to empty. Once the building grew quiet, his mistakes sounded louder in the silence. But he accepted them because he knew he had no choice. If he wanted to get through this, he had to face every wrong note, every slip, every moment when his hands didn't listen to his mind. By the time he reached home that afternoon, he felt exhausted, not physically, but mentally. Music was something that usually filled him with peace, but today, it felt like a battle. Still, he wasn't ready to stop. After dinner, he went straight to his room. He sat at the piano again and started where he left off. The hours passed slowly. His fingers grew sore. His back began to ache. But he didn't want to stop. Every time he thought about taking a break, he remembered the whispers from class, the doubts people had about him, and something inside him pushed him forward. Late in the evening, he paused to stretch. His lamp cast a soft glow over the keys, making the piano look like a quiet companion instead of an opponent. He realized he hadn't drunk water in hours. He stood up, went to the kitchen, and splashed some cold water on his face. The shock woke him up just enough. When he returned to the piano, he stared at the sheet again. Something bothered him. He couldn't understand the emotion of the piece. He could play the notes slowly if he tried long enough. The feeling behind them remained a mystery. He leaned back and sighed deeply. That was when he remembered something, the rumor about an old recording. Some students said that long ago, a former performer had recorded the piece during a competition. It wasn't an official recording, but a copy had been passed around among students for years. He wondered if he could find it. He pulled out his laptop and began searching. Most results were irrelevant, but after a long search, he found a link on a student forum from years ago. It looked old, almost forgotten. He clicked it. The recording wasn't high quality. There was a faint static sound in the background, and the piano felt distant. But the moment the first notes played, he froze. The performer's hands moved through the song with a smoothness he had never imagined. The tempo shifts felt natural, not sudden or confusing. The melody carried a feeling he had never understood before. It wasn't just music. It was a story full of emotion, pain, hope, and something deeper that he couldn't describe. He listened to the entire piece in silence. When the last note faded, he sat still for a long moment. Then he played it again. And again, with each replay, something began to change inside him. He wasn't just hearing the music, he was feeling it. The recording opened a door in his mind, revealing layers he hadn't noticed before. When he finally closed his laptop, his hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from something close to inspiration. He sat back down at the piano, took a deep breath, and played the opening notes again. This time, something was different. His hands felt lighter. The rhythm came more naturally. He wasn't just trying to follow instructions anymore. He was trying to express something. He practiced until the clock on the wall showed midnight. His eyes were tired, but his heart felt awake. The mistakes were still there, lots of them, but he wasn't frustrated anymore. He understood now that the song wasn't about perfection. It was about honesty. Over the next few days, his routine became simple. School, home, practice, sleep. But even though the days repeated themselves, something inside him kept growing. His fingers began to move with more confidence. His ears became more sensitive to the small details in the piece. He found moments of connection, tiny flashes when the music felt like it belonged to him. One evening, while practicing a particularly difficult passage, he felt something click. His hands moved without hesitation, the notes flowing into each other as if they were guiding him instead of the other way around. When he reached the end of the section, he stopped. Stunned, he had played it correctly. Not perfectly, but correctly. A quiet smile formed on his face. It wasn't a loud victory, but it meant more to him than anyone would ever know. As the days continued, he noticed something new. He no longer felt fear when he sat at the piano. Instead, he felt curiosity. It was like the song was slowly revealing itself to him piece by piece, measure by measure. But the real change happened late one night. He had been practicing for hours, and the house was silent. His family had gone to sleep, and the only sound was him and the piano. He reached a part of the song that he hadn't understood before, an emotional passage that always felt empty when he played it. This time, though, something inside him shifted. He wasn't thinking about the notes. He wasn't thinking about technique. Instead, he remembered something simpler moment from his childhood. A quiet memory of sitting beside an old piano in a small community hall, listening to someone play a gentle melody. He remembered how safe it felt, how warm, how full of feeling. That memory poured into his hands. When he played the passage this time, he felt tears forming in his eyes. The music sounded real, like it had finally come to life. He didn't stop playing. His hands moved as if they knew what to do, as if the song had been waiting for him to find this feeling. When he finished, he sat there for a long time, breathing slowly. He wiped his eyes and looked at the piano with a new kind of understanding. He realized he wasn't fighting the song anymore. He was becoming part of it, and slowly, without him noticing. The impossible piece no longer felt impossible. It felt like a journey he was finally ready to take. He closed the piano gently and got up, feeling both exhausted and strangely fulfilled. The room was dark, except for the soft light of the lamp. Outside, the world was silent. He stood there, knowing something had changed tomorrow. He would practice again, and the day after. That end every day, until he could play the song the way it was meant to be played. Not perfectly, but truthfully, he woke up the next day with a strange feeling in his chest. A mix of calm and excitement. It wasn't the kind of excitement that made noise or demanded attention. It was quiet, steady, almost like a gentle push from inside. Something had changed the night before, and he could feel it even before he opened his eyes. The memory of that breakthrough played in his mind again and again. He remembered the moment when the music stopped feeling like a wall and started feeling like a door. He remembered the feeling in his chest when the song finally made sense, even if only for a moment. That feeling stayed with him, warm and fragile, as he got ready for school. He kept thinking about that section of the piece, the part he had finally understood. He wanted to go back to it as soon as possible. He wanted to see if the feeling would still be there, or if it had been just a lucky moment at school. He walked into the hallway with his usual quiet steps. Students were talking loudly, comparing notes, laughing about things he didn't quite catch. He moved past them without saying a word, his mind on the practice room, the moment he reached it. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The room felt familiar, as if it was waiting for him. He sat at the piano and placed his fingers gently on the keys. He started with the same passage he had discovered last night. To his relief, the feeling was still there. Maybe not as strong, but real enough to guide him. He played it again, then again, letting the music settle into his hands. Then he moved on to the next section. This one was tricky. The rhythm shifted sharply, the melody jumped unpredictably, and the left hand had to move quickly across the keys in a way that felt unnatural. But after the breakthrough he had experienced, he didn't feel afraid of it anymore. He slowed it down. He studied each note carefully. He played the part with patience, repeating every small piece until his fingers could move without hesitation. Hours passed like minutes. When the bell rang for his first class, He sighed softly and closed the piano lid. He didn't want to leave, but he forced himself to step out. School was still a part of his life. He couldn't let his other responsibilities fall apart. During the morning classes, he tried to stay focused, but his mind kept drifting back to the music. He imagined the piano keys as he took notes in his textbooks. He tapped rhythms on his desk without realizing it. When the teacher called on him once, he was so lost in thought that he didn't hear it the first time, but even though he was distracted, it didn't feel like a bad thing. It was as if something inside him was waking up, stretching after a long sleep. At lunch, he didn't sit with anyone. He found a quiet corner under a staircase and listened to the old recording again through his headphones. The more he listened, the more the music started to make sense. He began to understand the emotion behind each rise and fall, each sharp change, each lingering soft note. After school, he returned to the practice room the moment the bell rang. He closed the door and didn't come out until the sun began to set. Day after day, the same routine continued. At first it felt tiring, but slowly it began to feel natural. His hands moved more smoothly. His timing became more confident. Some days he felt tired or frustrated, especially when he couldn't get certain passages right. But even on the difficult days, he found himself unable to stop practicing. Music had become more than a challenge. It had become a part of him. One evening, after a long day of school and practice, he walked out of the building just as the sky was turning orange. The campus was quiet, except for a few students chatting near the gate. As he passed them, he noticed something surprising. They were talking about him. He didn't have to listen closely to understand. He heard his name, followed by words like "that impossible piece," and "can he really play it?" He kept walking without reacting, but the words stuck in his mind. He wasn't sure how to feel. A part of him felt nervous he didn't like attention. But another part of him felt something else, something he wasn't used to. Pride. He wasn't playing for them. He wasn't trying to prove anything. But knowing that people were talking about him made the journey feel more real. When he got home, he went straight to the piano again. He practiced until his fingers were tired and his eyes felt heavy. And when he finally stopped, he realized something important. He was no longer afraid of the song. It still challenged him. It still surprised him. But it didn't scare him anymore. He might not have mastered it yet, but he could see the path now. The impossible song had become a journey that he knew he could complete. A week passed, then another. His improvement became more noticeable. He still made mistakes, but fewer than before. He could play longer sections without stopping. Sometimes the music flowed so naturally that he startled himself. One afternoon, as he was practicing alone, he noticed someone standing outside the practice room window. It was his teacher. The teacher didn't interrupt. They just watched quietly, listening to him play. He felt embarrassed at first, but he didn't stop. Something told him to keep going. He played through a full section of the piece, one of the hardest ones without breaking the rhythm. When he finished, the teacher opened the door with a small, thoughtful smile. "You've changed," the teacher said softly. He looked down, unsure how to respond. I've been practicing. It's more than that," the teacher said. "Your playing has emotion now, not just skill. That's what this piece needs." Hearing those words filled him with a warmth that spread through his chest. He didn't know what to say. He had never been the type to accept praise easily. The teacher placed a hand gently on the side of the piano and added, "Keep going. You're closer than you think." After the teacher left, he sat at the piano for a long time, feeling a new sense of confidence. The encouragement wasn't loud or dramatic, but it felt powerful. He continued practicing late into the evening, but he noticed something changing during these sessions. His hands no longer moved like they were copying patterns. They moved like they were telling a story. His heart was in every note, every pause, every breath of the music. Sometimes he closed his eyes while playing, letting the melody guide him. It wasn't always perfect, but it felt honest. And honesty made the music feel alive. As the performance day crept closer, he could feel the pressure building, but it didn't crush him. It sharpened him. Every practice session had purpose. Every mistake was something to learn from. Every breakthrough, no matter how small, added to his strength. One night, after an especially long practice session, he walked home slowly, carrying his bag over one shoulder. The streets were quiet, and the cool air brushed against his face. He thought about the first day he saw the sheet music. He remembered the fear he felt, the doubt that almost consumed him. And now here he was, walking home after playing entire sections of that same piece with confidence. He realized something that felt almost unreal. He was becoming the kind of person he never believed he could be. Someone capable, someone growing, someone brave. When he finally reached his house, he went straight to his room and sat on the edge of his bed. His body was tired, but his spirit felt full. He knew he still had a long way to go. There were still difficult sections that needed work, still details he had to polish, still emotions he needed to understand. But he also knew something more important. He wasn't alone in the journey. The piano was with him. The music was with him. His teacher's belief in him was with him. Even the doubts from others had become fuel. Pushing him forward, he lay back on his bed and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. The melody played softly in his mind. The song that once terrified him now felt like a part of him. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, not loud enough for anyone else to hear, "I can do this." And for the first time since the assignment was given to him, he truly believed it. The next morning, he returned to the piano with renewed purpose. And as the days passed, his connection to the music deepened. He grew not just as a player, but as a person. The song had stopped being unplayed. It had become his own. The next morning began long before the sun came up. The sky outside his small window still looked like a deep shade of blue. It's almost black, and the world felt quiet enough to hear his own breath. He woke without an alarm, as if something inside him pushed him to rise earlier than usual. For a moment, he sat on the edge of the bed, letting the calm of the room settle around him. It was strange how peaceful everything felt after the chaos of the previous day. But deep down, he knew that peace wasn't the real reason he was awake. Something was pulling him toward the piano. He stretched his arms, rubbed his eyes, and moved toward the corner of the room where his old upright piano stood. It wasn't a good piano, at least not in the eyes of anyone who cared about perfect sound. A few keys were chipped, and one note always hummed a bit longer than it should. But to him, it was home. Every mark on it held a story, a memory, a moment he had lived through. He lifted the fallboard slowly, as if waking a friend who had been sleeping too long. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, then touched them gently. The sound that filled the room was soft and warm, and for a brief second, he felt a kind of comfort he couldn't explain. The song that had been handed to him, the one people whispered about, the one no one wanted to attempt, still sat in his mind like a ghost. He took out the sheets from his bag. The paper was still slightly bent from how tightly he had held it the day before. He placed it on the stand and took a deep breath. The notes looked the same, but something in his mind felt different. It was as if he could finally see the shape of the music, not just the difficulty. He began slowly pressing the first few notes with caution. The room felt cold, but the melody warmed it little by little. The early part of the song was manageable, but soon the complexity rose again. His fingers stumbled, hesitated, then stopped. He took another breath and tried again. And again, hours seemed to pass without him noting. Next few days moved slowly, almost like time itself was giving him space to figure things out. Each morning he woke with the same quiet determination he felt earlier, and each day he returned to the piano with a kind of stubborn hope that pushed him forward even when the music didn't come out right. The difficult parts of the piece still stood like a tall wall in front of him. But something inside him kept saying he wasn't done trying. He began to notice small changes. Tiny ones that only someone who spent hours with the same notes would recognize. A transition that once felt impossible now felt only slightly out of reach. A section that used to make his fingers freeze now made him pause for just a moment before continuing. These small victories didn't look like much from afar, but to him, each one felt like a breath of relief. But progress didn't come without frustration. There were times when he would play a passage perfectly 3 times in a row, only for it to fall apart completely on the fourth attempt. There were times when he would think he understood the rhythm, only to lose it halfway through. There were moments when he wondered whether the teacher had made a mistake by giving this piece to him. One afternoon, he sat at the piano, long after the sun had begun to set. His hands felt heavy, his back stiff, his eyes sore from reading the same lines again and again. He pressed a few keys, and the notes came out uneven, almost angry. He stopped, closed his eyes, and let the silence fill the room. He stayed like that for a while, neither playing nor thinking clearly, just breathing in the silence. Then, suddenly, he felt a presence behind him. When he turned slightly, he saw an older man who lived in the same building. The man often passed by their home, greeting everyone with a warm smile and a gentle wave. "You've been practicing for hours," the man said softly. He nodded, trying to get it right. The man looked at the sheet on the piano with curiosity. "That's a difficult one, you know it?" he asked. "I've heard it," the man replied, stepping a little closer. "A beautiful piece. Complicated, but beautiful." He looked back at the keys, his fingers resting lightly over them. "I don't know if I can do it." The man chuckled quietly. "Everyone who attempts something hard says that at some point." He leaned against the side of the piano. "But the real question is, do you want to do it?" He hesitated. The question was simple, yet it carried a weight he wasn't sure he was ready to answer. But he spoke honestly. "Yes," he said. "I do." "Then don't stop," the man said with a warm smile. "Not while you're this close to understanding it." The man left as quietly as he had arrived, and for a moment, the room felt different. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt reassuring. He lifted his hands again and played slowly. This time, the notes came out softer, calmer. Not perfect, but clearer. He didn't try to rush through the difficult part. He let the music breathe, let his fingers settle into the patterns he had fought so hard to learn. Later that evening, after a long practice session, he decided to take a walk outside. The cool night air felt refreshing, and he could hear faint noises from nearby shops and people talking as they passed. The world felt alive in a different way. He walked slowly, letting his thoughts wander. He wondered what it would feel like to play the piece in front of others. Would his hands shake? Would he forget everything he had learned? Or would something inside him finally settle, allowing the music to flow the way it was meant to? On his way back, he noticed a small group gathered near a local music shop. Curious, he approached and saw that they were watching a student perform on an electric keyboard set up outside the shop. The student played confidently. The crowd clapped with genuine admiration. He stood there for a moment, watching quietly. It was strange how someone could stand in front of people and play without fear. The student didn't seem nervous at all. Instead, he seemed lost in the music, as if the crowd was simply a part of the world around him, not something to be afraid of. He felt a small mix of admiration and longing. Maybe one day, he thought. Maybe one day he could play with that kind of freedom. When he reached home, the piano greeted him like an old friend, waiting faithfully. He sat down again, not to practice the hard parts this time, but to play something simple, something he already knew well. The melody flowed naturally, without effort. And for the first time in days, he felt himself smiling. The next morning, the teacher called for a special rehearsal session for all students who had been assigned major pieces. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he arrived earlier than most. The room slowly filled with students, each carrying their own music sheets, their own fears, their own determination. The teacher began by explaining that each student would play a portion of their assigned piece in front of everyone. Not a full performance, but enough to show progress. His heart tightened slightly at the thought. When his name was called, he stood up, feeling a strange mix of nerves and excitement. His hands trembled lightly as he approached the piano, but he took a slow breath before sitting down. The room fell quiet. He placed his hands on the keys, letting them rest for a moment. He didn't look at the faces around him. He didn't think about the mistakes he might make. He just reminded himself of what the man had said. Don't stop. Not while you're this close. He began playing. The first notes came out clear and steady. He moved through the opening with confidence he didn't know he had. The second section flowed gently, smoother than he had expected. When he reached the difficult part, his fingers hesitated for the smallest moment, but then he pushed forward. Not perfectly, but with courage. When he finished the portion, the room was quiet, not the kind of silence that came from judgment, but the kind that came from attention. The teacher nodded slowly. "Good," the teacher said. "Not perfect, but good. And more importantly, honest." He felt something warm grow inside his chest. After he returned to his seat, a student sitting nearby whispered, "That was better than yesterday." Another said quietly, "You're getting there." He didn't say anything back, but he felt a sense of pride, small but real. After the session, the teacher pulled him aside. "Keep practicing," the teacher said gently. "You're closer than you think." He nodded. "I will." The next few days became a blend of practice, rest, reflection, and steady improvement. Each night, he went to sleep with the melody in his mind. And each morning, the piano welcomed him back without judgment. One evening, after a particularly strong practice session, he finally played the entire piece from start to finish without stopping. It wasn't flawless, the transitions still needed smoothing, and a few notes felt slightly rushed, but he did it. He reached the end. He sat back in disbelief, staring at the keys as if they had done something extraordinary all on their own. For a moment, he didn't move. He didn't breathe. He just let the feeling wash over him. A mix of relief, gratitude, and something close to joy. He whispered quietly to himself, "I can do this." Because now, for the first time, he truly believed it. The day of the performance arrived quietly. Almost too quietly for something that had lived in his mind for weeks. The morning light crept into his room slowly, brushing soft lines of gold across the floor. He opened his eyes to the stillness around him and lay there for a few seconds, listening to his own breathing. It was strange. He had expected to wake up with fear squeezing his chest, but instead he felt calm. Not confident, not excited. Just calm in a way that made him wonder if his mind had grown tired of worrying. He sat up, rubbing his hands together. They felt warm, steady. For someone who had spent so many nights imagining this moment, he thought he would feel different. But maybe this was exactly what he needed. Not too much emotion, not too much noise inside his head. Just a quiet readiness. He got out of bed and walked toward the piano. The instrument stood there the way it always did. Patient companion that had seen all his frustration, his failures, his small victories. He sat down and pressed a single note. The sound filled the room softly, not trying to impress or demand attention. A simple tone, honest and familiar. He didn't play the full piece. He didn't want to. Instead, he touched a few notes, letting his hands settle, letting his mind remember the feeling of the keys. He had practiced enough. Today wasn't about pushing anymore. It was about showing everything he had already built inside himself. Someone knocked on his door. A gentle voice asked, "Are you awake?" "Yes," he replied. The door opened slightly, and a face peeked in someone who had supported him quietly throughout all these weeks. "Big day," they said with a soft smile. He nodded. "Feels strange? Strange good or strange bad? I don't know yet." They chuckled and stepped inside. "Eat something before you go. Even if you feel nervous?" He nodded again. He knew they were right. After a small breakfast, he dressed carefully. Nothing fancy, nothing loud, just something clean and comfortable. He took one last look at his reflection. His eyes looked a little tired but steady. On the way to the auditorium, his mind drifted through everything that had happened. The first day he received the sheet, the shock he felt, the doubt, the long hours of practice. The mistakes that made him want to quit, the small pushes from people around him. Every part of that journey felt like a quiet thread that now pulled him toward this moment. When he reached the building, students were already gathered outside. Some were laughing nervously, some were practicing finger movements in the air. Some sat alone on the steps with their eyes closed, as if silently praying. Everyone carried their own storm inside them. He walked into the hallway and went straight to the backstage area. His heart finally began to beat a little faster, reminding him that this day meant something. A few students looked at him with curiosity, maybe even respect. Word had spread about the piece he had been assigned, and though no one said it aloud, many wondered if he would manage it. The teacher approached him with a calm expression. "You ready?" He took a breath. "I think so." The teacher placed a hand on his shoulder. "Remember, perfection isn't the goal. Honesty is. Play the way you practiced. Let the music carry you. Don't fight it," he nodded. Those words steadied him more than anything. Minutes passed. Performances began. From backstage, he could hear faint applause. Soft murmurs, the shifting of chairs, the muffled hum of an audience eager to be amazed. Finally, the teacher called his name. His body felt light, almost like he was walking without touching the ground. He stepped forward, and a thin curtain parted slightly. The room opened before him in a wide stretch of seats filled with peoples, teachers, families, strangers. The lights were bright, but not blinding. He could see the stage clearly. He could see the piano waiting for him. The audience quieted as he walked to the instrument. Every step felt like a heartbeat. When he reached the piano, he sat down slowly. The bench felt cool, the keys familiar. He placed his hands on them, but didn't press anything yet. Instead, he took a moment to breathe. Silence filled the room. Not the uncomfortable kind. The expectant kind, he began. The opening notes flowed gently, almost like the beginning of a story he had told 1,000 times, but still felt new. His fingers moved with a calm certainty he didn't expect. The first section sang softly through the hall, clear and warm. Then came the middle portion, the part that had once made him feel small, the part that made so many students give up. His fingers approached it with caution, but he didn't slow down. He trusted the weeks of practice. He trusted the countless hours he had spent listening to the music, studying it, living with it. The first few difficult transitions passed smoothly. The audience leaned a little forward, sensing something unusual, something honest. Then came the hardest part, the one that had kept him awake at night. The crossing of hands, the sudden speed shift, the change in tone. His fingers trembled for a split second. But he didn't let fear take hold. He breathed in, and he played. The notes spilled out with surprising clarity. Not perfect, no. A few notes leaned slightly off timing. A few transitions felt tighter than he wanted. But the emotion behind them was real. He didn't try to impress. He didn't try to force a smoothness he hadn't mastered yet. He played honestly. The heart of someone who had fought quietly for this moment, and the room listened. No one coughed. No chair creaked. No whisper drifted in the air. The silence wrapped around the music like a kind of respect he had never felt before. He reached the final lines of the piece. His fingers slowed slightly, letting the melody breathe as it prepared to settle. The final note rang through the hall. Long and full, he lifted his hands gently off the keys. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, heavy, almost emotional then, as if the audience needed a moment to remember they were allowed to move. Applause began soft at first, then stronger, then rising into a wave of sound that filled the entire room. He blinked. His heart felt light, almost like it was floating. He stood slowly, not used to this kind of attention. People were clapping with genuine warmths, some smiling, some nodding, some looking at him with quiet admiration. The teacher stood near the side of the stage, clapping with a proud expression. Not proud because the performance was perfect. Proud because the student had refused to back down from something everyone else considered impossible. He bowed gently, then stepped away from the piano. Backstage, a few students rushed to him. "That was amazing," one said. "You actually played it," another whispered almost in disbelief. He smiled shyly. "I just tried my best." One student shook his head. "No, you did more than that." He didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded. Later, the teacher approached him again. "What did I tell you? Honesty over perfection. Ah-da-da-da-da." He looked down at his hands. They felt warm, steady, alive. "Thank you," he said softly. The teacher smiled. "You earned this moment. Remember what it felt like." On his way home, the world felt different. The streetlights glowed softly, the cool breeze brushed against his face, and the quiet sounds of the night felt almost musical. He walked slowly, replaying the moment in his mind, not the applause, not the silence, not even the music. What he remembered most clearly was the exact moment. He realized he wasn't afraid anymore. When he reached home, he sat at his piano once more. He didn't play the full piece. Instead, he pressed a single note, the same one he had played in the morning. But now it sounded different. It sounded like a promise that he could grow, a promise that he could face things that once seemed impossible, a promise that every difficult step, every quiet struggle, every hour spent alone with the keys had led him to something real. He closed his eyes and let the note fade. The room was silent, but this time, it was the kind of silence he understood.